Namaste, Kabibal, and welcome to our continuing professional development webinar series. For the discussion this afternoon, our topic will be on supporting students with discipline problems or disruptive behaviors in blended learning modalities. Before we begin, kindly take note of the following reminders. First, you have to make sure you're registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.revolvegroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions in the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by a speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnUs1PH as our official hashtag to our Vibal webinars. Experience learning, Kabibal. And now to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker for today. Mr. Joram Kim Corcuera is a graduate of Bachelor in Secondary Education, major in English at the Philippine Normal University in 2011. He obtained his Master of Arts major in Communication degree at the Ateneo de Manila University. Currently, he is taking his degree of Doctor of Philosophy, major in English Language Studies at the University of Santo Tomas. He has been a teacher for almost a decade and has already taught English, literature, public speaking, and research classes. He also represented the Philippines in various international research conferences about education and communication. He has been delivering CPD training sessions and teacher seminars across the country for more than 3 years. He is also into journalism as he already experienced handling a number of student publications in various schools and universities, including San Beda University and University of Santo Tomas. At present, he is working as a faculty member at University of Santo Tomas Junior High School, where he teaches communication arts and journalism courses. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Joram Kim Corcuera.
All right. So, good afternoon to everyone who are watching, of course, our webinar today. Isa pong magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. So, today is Friday. So, sana mas marami pa tayo, of course, ngayong hapon para at least masulit natin kung ano yung matututunan natin ngayong hapon, of course. And eventually, during the weekend, we'll be able, of course, to take our rest, a well-deserved rest. And syempre, balik trabaho ulit tayo, of course, ng Lunes. Alright, so now allow me to share with you the slides that I actually prepared for our webinar this afternoon. So there you go. All right. So indeed, there were a lot of challenges and surely there will be more challenges that will come our way. Considering that most of us, of course, this is our first time to implement online learning or full online education. Okay, without a doubt, we educators would have to do a lot of adjustments. And surely, marami na tayong adjustments na ginawa in the past. Pero definitely, for us to be able, of course, to look for the best combination to make things work, to make online learning work, of course, for our students, then kailangan pa talaga natin, of course, mag-adjust in order for us to become the best teachers in the eyes of our students. Again, to those who are watching this session, to those who are watching this webinar, I hope you'll be able to gain new insights that would be fruitful and useful, of course, sa ating pagtuturo sa mga estudyante virtually. But before anything else, allow me to thank Vival Group for another invitation, of course, to be the resource speaker of today's YouTube webinar. I am indeed honored and, of course, excited to share what I know, okay, my experience as well in teaching online. Again, welcome to our webinar entitled Supporting Students with Discipline Problems or Disrupted Behaviors in Blended Learning Modalities. So, right now, in every webinar po na na-attendan ko, so if to those who are watching na hindi po ako first time napanood, I always start my presentation with what I call the quote of the day or the quote of the session. So today's quote, basahin ko po para sa inyo. Motivation gets you going, but discipline keeps you growing. Okay? We might be asking ourselves from time to time, bakit nga ba tayo nandito sa webinar na to? Right? It's not mainly because we want a certificate, but it's mainly because we know that there are a lot of things that we need to know. The teaching and learning process do not end. And there are a lot of things that we have to discover, that we have to understand, especially with regards to this implementation of what we call distance learning. Regardless if you're doing, for example, uh, online distance learning or modular distance learning. The many changes in the field of education, including, of course, the ones brought upon by the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, are the primary reasons why we need help, why we need, of course, assistance. And in order for us, of course, to be able to learn and eventually master the skill of teaching virtually, okay, it is very important for us teachers and even to our students to not only remain motivated, but also, of course, to be very disciplined in everything that we do, because this is where we will grow and this is where we would be able, of course, to maximize our full potential. Indeed, the year 2020, this is the year of change. Okay? People change, including the learners. But not only that, 2020 tested us, specifically Filipinos, our country Philippines. Baga talagang sinubukan talaga tayo with everything that we have. First, of course, the typhoons. Just recently, medyo matagal yung suspension ng classes. Why? Because of Typhoon Rolly, Typhoon Shuning, and of course, Typhoon Ulysses. Okay? And earlier, before this webinar, I was trying to look at how many typhoons pa po ang pinapredict na darating sa Pilipinas. Sabi, there are 1 to 2 pa. So indeed, teaching online, mahirap na nga, hindi na nga mapagkasya yung oras because of course may screen time ang mga bata. And adding to that specific challenge would have to be the many suspensions na hindi naman talaga pwedeng hindi ibigay. Right? So which of course made it really difficult for us to be able, of course, to fulfill our duties and responsibilities. Aside from these typhoons, of course, we have this global health crisis, the coronavirus disease 2019, na talaga namang naging dahilan kung bakit ngayon hindi tayo magkakasama-sama ng face-to-face, di ba? Kay Miss Michelle noong nakaraan, sabi ko sa kanila, I hope the next time that I'm going to deliver a talk for Bibal, sabi ko sana kagaya nung dati face-to-face. Di ba? Yung tipong minsan we have to travel just of course to be with our teachers in Visayas and Mindanao because it's a different feeling of course kapag talagang face-to-face. But then, sabi ko nga, we cannot force our students, even us, diba? It's too risky for us to go out and to hold face-to-face classes. That is why, of course, we're doing this right now. Kumbaga, everything shifted to online. A proof of the risk and the danger, of course, would have to be the data. Okay, this was taken from Rappler PH. The coronavirus 2019 cases in the Philippines as of Wednesday, December 2. So total confirmed cases in the country would have to be around 434,357. And dito, 26,916 ang active cases pa din. And imagine, in one day, 1,438 ang new confirmed cases. Okay? Total deaths, very alarming na rin ito, 8,436. Although, of course, it's good to know that, of course, the total recoveries are amounting to 399,005. So looking at these numbers, talaga namang hindi talaga natin gigistuin magkaroon ng face-to-face classes. Not because we don't want to, but because we know that in this new normal, safety is always the priority. Speaking of the new normal, allow me to share some things with you. Pag sinabi natin new normal, it refers to the new way of living and of course going about our lives, work, and interaction with other people. It pertains to the new way of thinking about deciding on, making decisions, doing usual affairs, attending our duties as teachers, going to work, for example, of course, with an invigorated sense to remain healthy. Because in the new normal, the priority at all times would be, of course, everyone's safety and security. Okay? And because, but sinabi natin new normal, of course, ang pinaka-common term dito would have to be lockdown, di ba? I think it was yesterday while I was surfing my Twitter account, browsing rather on my feed sa Twitter, nakita ko din na parang dineclare ng isang huge multimedia company na ang word of the year ay lockdown. Why? Because definitely, hindi lang sa Pilipinas nagkakaroon ng quarantine. Meaning to say, everyone is still forced, of course, to stay at home. We're only allowed to go out, of course, if talagang kailangan. And because of that, all of us become like this one. Okay? All of us are like this specifics, like this one, like this girl. Okay? We face our computer not only to learn, not only to facilitate learning, but to do everything that we need to do. Like for example, paying our bills, we pay it through online banking. For example, looking for entertainment. Dati, we go out, we go to the mall. Ngayon, we'd prefer watching vlogs, would prefer watching videos. Di ba? Dati, of course, if we want to learn something, we'll attend seminars face-to-face. Ngayon, in form of webinars. And of course, most importantly, our students. Dati, we go to school every day from 7 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m., minsan until 5, minsan until 6 pa. But then right now, all lessons are being delivered online. Okay? We are not allowed, of course, to hold classes using the traditional face-to-face setup. So we are forced, whether we like it or not, to rely on the educational tools of online learning. Okay? Indeed, ito tayo lahat ngayon, di ba? Not only in school, right? Everyone is connected by technology. Ngayong Pasko, for example, di ba? Uh, as yearly ako kami, palagi kami nag-reunion and then the like. But this year, most probably we cannot do it. Why? Number one, I have cousins who are in the medical profession. Siyempre, of course, they are exposed. So talagang nagka-quarantine din talaga sila. So the more that we cannot do it. So we'll most probably will be celebrating the Christmas season with them virtually. Di ba? Ganun din malamang karamihan po sa mga estudyante natin and the like. So right now, this is the setup, of course, also in the field of education here in our country. Okay? So specifically, this is what we call the online distance learning, a specific method of study where teachers and students do not meet in a physical classroom. But we use, of course, the internet to be able, of course, to connect with one another. We use, of course, the power of internet to be able to deliver learning to the students in the comfort and safety of their homes. Because through internet, through the use of this modern technology, through the use of this innovation, we are able to connect with students to, of course, from different parts of the world. Diba? I'm sure may mga estudyante tayo ngayon. Yung iba, for example, nasa ibang bansa. Yung iba nasa Pilipinas. But then, of course, through the use of the internet, we're still able, of course, to communicate with one another effectively. But aside from that one, we should also note that even before the pandemic, actually hindi naman talaga ang pandemic lang ang naging dahilan why, of course, we're trying to maximize the use of technology. Even before the pandemic started, okay, our students, of course, are already members of the Generation Z. So they have any skills in terms of using technology. No wonder a lot of teachers are already shifting towards, of course, maximizing the use of technology in the field of education. And why is this one? Why are we adopting these specific changes? In a study done by Hootsuite International in January 2020, take note that January pa po ito, so ibig sabihin before the pandemic. And I'm pretty sure maybe the number even doubled or baka naging triple pa because of course of the pandemic na talagang it left us with no option. Okay? So total population 7.75 billion, and out of the 7.75 billion, 5.19 billion are unique mobile phone users. 4.54 billion rather, are internet users. Imagine kung gaano kadami yun at kung gaano pa kadami yung nadagdag dyan, of course, because right now, lahat talaga tayo, we maximize, of course, the use of technology. And of course, 3.80 billion ay active social media users. Not to mention, most of these specific individuals are, of course, members of the generation where our students actually belong. Specifically, the Generation Z. Okay? Sabi nga nila, di ba, I hope tatanong ko sa inyo if you agree or disagree with this one. I've yet to have a student tell me that they cannot use technology in class because they haven't had professional development on it. Right? In other words, ako ganyan ako. In other words, wala naman akong estudyante na magkasabi sa akin, sir, paano po gumamit nitong, paano po mag-on ng video? Paano po mag-ganyan? There will be some questions, but then madali nilang nakukuha. Why? Because it's their generation. It's their thing. It's their language. When I talk about the members of the Generation Z, one thing that they're dominant at is really knowing and maximizing their ability, of course, to use technology. However, when we talk about technology, this is something that you always have to remember, okay? In the field of education, technology can be a life changer, a game changer for kids who are both in school and out of school. When I say life changer and game changer, it can either be a positive one or a negative one. If the teachers won't be able to use these modern innovations in a fruitful manner, in a positive way, then we expect, of course, that technology would break the students. But if we, educators, formators, would be able, of course, to maximize the potential of these different forms of technology, then what should we expect? Then, of course, we have to expect nothing but the best outcome from our students. Because in the field of education right now, the biggest decision that we make is we choose. We choose to go back to the old ways or we choose to move forward to the new way. If we move backwards, okay, to the old way, then we're going back to the traditional way. We ask ourselves, would that be effective? Or if we move forward, okay, we try to adjust as professionals. We try to, of course, cope with the demands of our students. We try to address the preferences of our students. Then that is, of course, what you call the new way of education. Now, some of you might be asking, why? Bakit nga ba? Bakit ba natin kailangan pumunta sa new way? Why do we have to leave our old strategies? Why do we have to leave our old practices? It's primarily because in the field of education, there are, of course, a lot of changes. Specifically, these global and local changes are reflected, number one, in the system. Okay, sa sistema ng bawat eskwelahan. Okay? Even in the curriculum, right? For example, before, nasa RBEC tayo. Ngayon, nasa K-12 na tayo. Okay? Sistema ng eskwelahan, of course, right now, we're implementing full education, right? So, sa UST, ang tawag namin, enriched virtual education, right? So, assessment. Before dati, nung ako nung estudyante ako, the most important assessment would be the periodical test. Kapag na-perfect ko ang periodical test o na-perfect namin ang periodical test, then most likely we'll be able to have a line of 9. But nowadays, even if you get a perfect score in the periodical test, if hindi mataas ang performance task mo, then what would happen to your grade? Now, in the online learning, right, the Department of Education released a memorandum na wala ng periodical test. That, of course, to avoid distance cheating, that's the term that they call. That's how they call it. So ngayon, they rely on skill-based assessments, on authentic assessments. So these are just some sa mga nagbago. And of course, methodology and strategies. Before listening to the lecture of my teachers, hindi ako nabobore. I enjoy it. Magdadala lang si teacher ng isang kartolina o Manila paper, nakasulat na lahat, minsan walking blackboard pa, di ba? But we enjoy the lesson. But right now, try to do it in front of your students. I'm sure after 10 minutes or maybe even less than 10 minutes, bored na sila. And because of these changes, okay, because of these changes in the field of education, we have to change with them. Because if we're not going to change with them, then definitely we are going to be left behind. Remember, the educational system in our country definitely changed even before the pandemic started. Dati, of course, the anatomy of a 20th century classroom, one is a teacher-led class instruction. So it's a one-size-fits-all. Whatever the teacher says, automatically everyone learns from it. Okay? Regardless kung average learner ka, fast learner ka, slow learner ka, it would not matter. Basta si teacher magtuturo. Pag di ka nakasunod, it's going to be your problem. That's why learning happens, of course, within the confines of the four walls and the bell schedule. Okay? And the only sources of information would either be the teacher or the books. Okay? However, in the 21st century, this is what we call the blended learning classroom. Let me emphasize first the concept of blended learning. Okay, at the first part na ating webinar ngayon, nakastick tayo doon before we go to disciplining them, before we go to helping them, of course, address their differences, their problems, and then like, ayan. Kagaya na, di ba, for example, the physical noise. Pasensya na. Okay? So, of course, in a blended learning classroom, course number one, there are many teachers. Okay, number one, of course, the teacher themselves. Number two, of course, we have the laptops, the computers, the interactive whiteboard. Okay? Nowadays, if we're having online learning, hindi lang tayo ang teacher. Of course, andyan ang parents, andyan ang mga kapatid nila, andyan ang mga kaibigan nila, andyan ang laptop, andyan ang internet, andyan ang videos, andyan ang instructional material. So all of these things, all of these people, lahat po ito tinatawag nating teachers. That's why in a blended learning classroom there is a greater student-teacher interaction. Okay, and of course the very beauty of this kind of setup of education is that there is we offer personalized learning paths. So let's say for example, struggling learner ka, medyo slow learner ka, the teacher can allot more time, of course, with you to assist you in your learning. If you are a fast learner, the teacher likewise can give you supplementary materials, of course, to of course, feed your kumbaga, feed your hungry or your hunger, for example, for learning. Kumbaga, yung thirst mo to learn more, to discover more. Nabibigay yan, of course, in a blended learning setup. Specifically, when I talk about blended learning, it is a strategy where online learning does not replace traditional learning. Instead, the two methods of learning are used complementarily together to create a full and inclusive learning experience. So that dapat talaga sabay yan, face to face, and of course, ang tinatawag natin na online learning. Last night, I was reading an article, hindi ko matandaan kung anong government agency yan, basta parang sinabi na parang they agree that dun sa mga areas na may low risk lang, mag-conduct na ng kahit papano ng face-to-face classes. Okay? Although of course, it would still depend on the approval of our president, of course, President Duterte. Okay? So if ever, for example, na magkaroon na kahit papano, paunti-unti ng face-to-face classes, then therefore we can implement blended learning. Pwedeng, for example, 2 days face-to-face, 3 days, of course, online, pwedeng ganun. So it depends, of course, to the setup that that the schools are going to create. However, of course, right now, ako for me, it's too risky pa din, it's too dangerous pa din. So ako, I'd rather stick with online. Okay? So blended learning enables the development and delivery of innovative course content along with new ways of measuring student engagement and learning. So pag ang term dito, innovative, ibig sabihin makabago, right? Makabago in a sense that we're utilizing different applications online, different platforms online that can help, of course, our students to learn, and that can help us also, of course, to assess our students' needs and our students' performances. Moreover, when I talk about blended learning, it supports the educational experience in novel ways, specifically by number one, enhancing the classroom experience with online materials. For example, gagamit tayo kunwari ng interactive PowerPoint presentation na downloadable online. We're going to use applications like Kahoot, okay? Videos, of course, definitely with these experiences, with these specific tools, the students become more engaged, okay? Providing more time for in-depth classroom discussions, yes. Because, for example, gumamit tayo ng flipped classroom strategy where the students would be able to, of course, watch videos ahead of time. Then, therefore, we are expecting that during the time na tinuturuan natin mga bata, they already have an understanding of what the lesson will be all about, allowing us, of course, to get a deeper, to get deeper insights, deeper answers, of course, with regards to the lesson. Enabling students to take ownership of their own learning. Why? Because if they're not going to do what they have to do, then definitely learning would not be made possible. Imagine, for example, kung hindi sila gagawa ng assignments nila, self-discipline, kung wala sila niyan, then definitely it would really be hard, of course, to conduct this kind of setup. Okay? So, allowing faculty members to enrich their curriculum using any number of online components, just like what I told you, everything that we need, halos lahat po talaga ay nasa online na. So, the only thing that we need to do is really to research, to maximize the number of materials, of course, found online. And lastly, of course, to model any level of technological experience and learning style. Maraming different ways po in terms of strategies na pwede natin gamitin para, of course, ma-maximize natin yung mga experience ng technological experience and learning styles. Napakarami pong strategies na pwede natin gamitin. Like, for example, gamification, flipped classroom, and the like. Okay? So when we talk about blended learning, there are also three parts. Number one, of course, in-person classroom activities facilitated by a trained educator. Siguro right now, we can have it in a virtual classroom, right? Kumbaga, tayo, we still give activities, we still conduct activities online. Ako po, for example, when I'm teaching, that does not mean that I'm going to give lectures. Okay? When I meet my students, I really try to maximize the time for them to facilitate activities that would help them understand the lessons better, that would help them, of course, deepen their understanding and assess whether or not they were able, of course, to achieve the objectives that we have for a certain day. Second, of course, online learning materials, often including pre-recorded lectures, given by that same instructor. Lalo na po pag talagang medyo mahirap ang lesson, we can give them, of course, pre-recorded materials so that they would be able to watch these things, answer worksheets ahead of time, and eventually, bago sila pumasok sa klase, meron na silang pagkakaintindi, meron na silang lesson na, of course, idea on what the lesson will be all about, which, of course, would make things easier for us. And lastly, of course, structured independent study time. guided by the material and the lectures and skills developed during the classroom experience. Blended learning does not support spoon feeding. Okay? Kaya po mahalaga pa rin po, of course, na may study time ang mga bata. Okay, independent study time, of course, let them explore the concepts on their own, of course, through the different activities that you are trying to, of course, give them. Okay? So we'll talk about, we'll talk about blended learning. The traditional model, kasi, ang role natin, we are providers of knowledge. Okay? So all students receive the same educational serving and had little or no control over their learning experience. Why? Admit it or not, pag sinabi natin traditional learning, the only thing that we're going to do, papasok tayo sa klase, uupo, makikinig. Magtataas ang kamay, mag-recite, makikinig. Magsasagot, makikinig, and then the like. Right? So, more often than not, it would be a teacher talk. It would be a lecture given to us by our teachers. That is a traditional way. In blended model, students as pursuers of knowledge. Yan yung magkaiba po. Teachers as providers of knowledge and students as pursuers of knowledge. Meaning to say, in a traditional model, that is a teacher-centered classroom. In a blended model, we have to let our students pursue. We have to let our students take the responsibility to learn. Okay? We only have to, of course, provide them activities, provide them, of course, opportunities for them, of course, to be able to learn these specific concepts. With blended learning, students assume greater control and a more active role in learning. If they would be doing something, then they would be learning. If they decide not to be responsible for today, then definitely they will be facing the consequences of their action. Kasi kapag traditional, for example, ayoko makinig, tuturo naman ni teacher, tinuturo ni teacher. Pero kasi pwedeng, for example, kinabukasan, we'll start with an activity. Pag hindi nila inaral, then definitely they would not be able, of course, to participate actively because they're only going to learn these concepts through that specific activity. Whereas, ang goal ng teacher is that during the activity, ma-assess kung talaga naintindihan na nila at hindi. Kung hindi, maitama yung mali na intindihan at kung tama, mai-deepen pa yun, mai-reinforce. Okay? So some learning involves teachers providing instruction at the brick and mortar location, and some involves students learning independently at computers. Di ba meron tayong tinatawag sa online learning na asynchronous learning. May tinatawag tayong modular learning. So here, our students definitely work on their own. Pero teachers, reminder, pag sinabi po natin modular learning, napakahalaga po that we give feedback. Okay? Because imagine, paano po natututunan ng bata kung magsasagot lang sila na magsasagot? May hirapan po sila maintindihan lahat yun. So it is very important, of course, to return the modules with them with answers, give detailed feedback para at least maintindihan po ng mga bata, ay, ito pala yung mali, ay, ito pala yung tama. Unfortunately, matrabaho po talaga ang checking lalo sa modular. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin, ito yung score, tapos walang nakalagay kung anong mali, anong tama. Hindi pwedeng ganun. We have to address them so that the students would be able to know, ito pala yung mali ko. Mali pala pagkakaintindi ko dito. Because if we're going to give them, for example, okay, 14/20 ka, okay, 10/20 ka, how would the students know what they need to know and what, let's for example, they need to improve? Okay? So, that it does not mean that if they're going to learn things independently, talaga independent na walang assistance sa teacher. The teachers would always be there. Okay? We always have a very significant, a very important role in the process of learning. Okay? So moreover, students can make choices for how to learn content, where to learn it, which path to take to learn it, and how quickly to move through it. Even though the content that must be learned is the same for all students. Lalo na pag online, di ba? For example, okay, ang lesson natin today about nouns. Ay, gusto ko basahin ng PowerPoint. Ay, gusto ko manonood na lang ako ng video sa YouTube kahit hindi binigay ni teacher. Ay, gusto ko ganito. Ay, gusto ko ganyan. So, of course, through this kind of strategy, we are able to help them recognize that they're autonomous beings responsible for their decisions. And of course, the decisions that they make will define whether or not they would be successful or whether they're not, they will be able, of course, to achieve academic success towards the end, of course, of the lecture, right? So that is, of course, those are the things that, of course, we need to know about blended learning. Okay? So benefits of blended learning, number one, of course, a learner is more engaged using a variety of content types. To achieve engagement in online learning, specifically in blended learning, okay, in this approach, okay, a lot of plethora of different material types are being used. It could be videos, audio, of course, that and enhanced presentations, okay, that we can actually include in the things that we provide to our students. And eventually, these things would help our learners be more engaged, okay, and make sure, of course, that the material is well understood. Okay? Second, of course, is different learner, different types of learning or different learning styles. Gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, blended learning offers personalized learning. Diversifying your teaching methods is a good way to ensure that the learners will be engaged to the lesson. A third, instructor can assess learner trends and act accordingly. Indeed, when you talk about blended learning, it helps training become much more meaningful in practice. With, of course, the e-learning process being adjusted according to the learner's progress. Kasi di ba, for example, sabihin natin na medyo nahihirapan sila sa concept na to, is very easy, of course, to pinpoint who are the students and provide intervention, of course, to them. Fourth, of course, improve feedback. Okay? Blended learning allows us to provide our students immediate feedback. Through the use of different educational tools, platforms, in one click, we will be able, of course, to get item analysis, not only the results, but even the item analysis of the exams that we actually deploy to our students, allowing us to see which specific lessons should be deepened, which specific lessons are well understood, or can I already move forward, or should I go back and, of course, reteach. And lastly, of course, here in this slide, fifth is it makes learning fun. Definitely. Sabi ko nga kanina, imagine, this is the language of the students. So what do we expect? We expect, of course, that they would be able, of course, to understand things better, to understand things deeper, because they're being entertained, because they enjoy what they're doing, because this is their language, because you're using and maximizing the use of technology. Remember, the students are what you call the members of the Generation C. Okay, so they're expected to be the fastest growing generation in both the marketplace and the workplace. Reminder lang po, hindi na sila millennials. They are the generation that comes after the millennials. Okay? So they are, of course, more kumbaga in it talaga yung kanilang skills sa paggamit ng technology. So since we have a different generation of students, then therefore, there are a lot of practices that we have to understand na hindi na mag-work in terms of our classroom management before, sa classroom management, of course, ngayon. Online learning is growing increasingly popular with working students and students, of course, with children. Okay? So while this method of learning is more accessible and affordable than traditional courses, it can also require more discipline. Okay? To succeed in an online program, students must increase their self-discipline, reduce the possibility of distractions, and eventually, okay, possibly manage, of course, their time. Marami na, lalo na mga bata ngayon, marami silang iniisip. One, for example, sa loob ng bahay, ngayon, naka-work from home na tayong teacher sila, ano ba, study at home ba ang kanilang term? Okay? So, maraming problema sa bahay na hindi mo pwedeng iwan. At least dati sa face-to-face, pag umalis ka ng bahay, kahit pa paano nakakalimutan mo. Ngayon, may mga estudyante, for example, unfortunately, sabihin natin, working students na sila at a young age because they need to earn. So, dumadagdag yung mga responsibilidad nila. May mga bata, for example, na may iba pang priorities. Okay? So, these things, of course, hinder us from being able to effectively manage our class. Okay? But before we talk about classroom management in an online setup, let us try to define first what is classroom management. Okay? Classroom management is a process of creating and maintaining orderly classroom. That's the term. Creating and maintaining orderly classrooms, regardless if it's physical or virtual. Pag sinabi natin orderly, it does not mean na tahimik lang. Ibig sabihin nun, our students know what is right and what is wrong even if the teachers are not around. Okay, classroom management, it refers to the set of teacher behaviors that create and maintain conditions in the classroom that permit instruction to take place efficiently and effectively. So without classroom management, in other words, learning will never take place. Okay, so moreover, when we talk about classroom management, okay, of course, you can apply it through crisis and non-crisis moments. May problema o wala, dapat present yan. In the academic activities that we provide our students, whenever we give them instructions, kapag hindi malinaw ang instructions natin, it would result, of course, to a chaotic environment. The students would not be able to follow clearly the instructions that we're giving because they might be misled. of course, the rules and the consequences, dapat patas. Hindi ibig sabihin na may ginawa ang bata, automatically, bibigyan na natin ng parusa. For example, in the face-to-face setup, pag na-late ang bata, we give deductions. But online, kapag na-late ang bata at ang dahilan ng bata ay internet connection, who are we not to consider those things? Who are we not to, of course, consider these reasons as valid? Hindi naman natin nakontrolado ang internet, di ba? Unlike for example ng traffic, alam mo naman palang traffic, dapat mas maaga ka umaalis. Hindi naman natin pasabihin na, alam mo naman palang mawawala ng internet connection, dapat mas maaga ka nag-connect. Because the students do not know when magkakaproblema ang kanilang internet connection. Ngayon, of course, the behaviors would be very important. Discipline, ito yung mga key terms ay di-discuss natin in today's webinar. Planning, of course, the students, and then the like. So these are the concepts that we have to remember at all times when we talk about classroom management. However, pag tinandaan natin classroom management, reminder lang po always remember na napakahalaga nun. Dahil kagaya ng sinabi ni Christopher Taubang, without classroom management, teaching is practically impossible. Okay? Even in an online setup, baka sabihin nyo, okay lang sir, wala naman nag-iingay, nakamute naman lahat ng mic nila. Okay lang sir, distance learning naman kami, so wala namang maingay, diba? But then, noise is not the only way to measure if our class is observing, for example, a good behavior or not. Their punctuality, pumapasok ba sila? Nagpapasa ba sila on time and then the like. Okay? So there are many indicators na dapat nating tignan, dapat nating usisiin sa ganitong panahon at for us to be able to check whether or not our students are behaving well. Okay? But when we talk about classroom management, tatandaan natin, hindi po ito tungkol dito. Okay? Diba na tatandaan nyo to? This is a traditional way of disciplining our students. Before, walang mali dito. Okay? Dati ako, I have to agree. I also learned from this. But right now, it's something that you must never do. Because in this type of online setup, lalong-lalo na po ngayon, sa generation ng mga batang ito, it would not discipline them. It would even lead for example, to it could even lead, for example, to stories ng pagiging basbastos pa. Because of course, yung punishment na yan, it might be a reason for them na, ay, grabe, ginato ko ng teacher, gaganti ako. Di ba? So, ganun ng mga bata ngayon. So, they would hold grudge. So, we have to understand the generation. Our approach in terms of disciplining them would have to be always positive. Okay? Sayang hindi ko pala nakuha yung caption ng Vibal. Kahapon, when I was looking at the poster, ang nakalagay doon, naka-highlight doon, dapat in terms of online management, in terms of online training, in terms of online education, napakahalaga po na positive ang atake natin. Proactive, which is true. Why? Because right now, definitely ang daming iniisip ng bawat kabataan. Ang daming iniisip ng lahat ng tao. So it is, of course, kumbaga, our job to be able to at least understand these people. Okay? So that's why, kailangan po ang i-apply natin as, of course, yung tinatawag nating PDET. Okay? An approach based on sound pedagogical principles and practice that helps children succeed, gives them information they need to learn, and supports their development, protection from violence, and active participation in their learning. And this is what all teachers want, di ba? We all want, of course, our students to develop, okay, sa pag-iisip nila yung kahalagahan, of course, ng learning. At kung gusto natin gawin ganoon ang pag-iisip ng mga bata, then definitely we have to make schools a safe place for them. Hindi ibig sabihin na safe sila na walang hampas sa kanila, and then like, not only that, a place where they feel that it's going to be, kumbaga parang komportable ako dito. This is my home. This is my second home. I would love to be here. Hindi tipong, ayoko mag-online, may kita ko pa lang si Search, may kita ko si Miss Pinchin. Ayoko nang ganun. Hindi pwedeng ganun, di ba? So of course, we need to make the students feel, okay, that school is a place that they are really welcome. Okay? Furthermore, we talk about PDET. It plays a role in creating safer schools where it does not only support children's full development, okay, but also improves the school environment by eliminating fear, teaching children self-discipline, and encouraging greater pleasure and engagement in learning. The word self-discipline, ito po ang sikreto sa online learning. Mamaya, i-deepen ko yan. Pero tandaan natin yan, self-discipline. So here in PDET, We reject the use of violence as a teaching tool. And our focus would be on guiding the children's behavior. So with that, we teachers, we play the role of mentor and guide them, of course, rather than, of course, enforcing good behavior through fear. Kaya hindi natin tatakutin yung mga bata na parang, pag ginawa mo yan, ganito mangyayari sa'yo. Hindi ganun. We have to make them realize that doing negative actions would lead them to, of course, a negative situations, problems, and then the like. Okay, so but we have to make them realize those things without instilling fear sa kanila. Okay, that is why right now allow me to share with you different ways on how to foster positive behavior management in an online classroom. This comes from Bill Saps. Okay, sabi dito, number one, we give the students choices and ownership of the class. Simple things can make a big difference in our classroom as the students feel that we value their opinion and we want them to be a part of it. Huwag natin sarilihin, lalo na pag online, we have to, di ba sabi ko kanina, pag nagtuturo tayo sa blended learning, we give more responsibility sa mga estudyante. Even in the choices that we make as a class, we involve them. Okay, clearly state the goals and objectives of the lesson by clearly and explicitly stating the learning objectives and goals of the lesson. The students can map out in their mind what they need to accomplish, of course, during the class time. Ako, kaya po napakahalaga din, my dear teachers, that at the beginning of each lesson, we have to present to them our target learning objectives for today. Diba? Taken, of course, from the most essential learning competencies, of course, coming from the Department of Education. Okay? Another one, of course, is be positive and encouraging even in correction. Hindi porke nagkamali ang bata, we define them, of course, to those mistakes. Nope. Don't just blast them down and say they're wrong. Since the ultimate goal, of course, is to encourage them to keep trying. Okay? So we have to make them feel, okay, nagkamali ako ngayon, I did not make it, but there's always a next time for me. And that is specific, the next time that I will be doing it, I'll make sure I'll be able, of course, to gain academic success. Okay? Ayan, kagaya na may mga physical noise. So talaga yung mga bagay na yan, talaga nakakastorbo yan, of course, sa online class. But then, of course, we have to find solutions with regards to those things. Okay? Next, of course, is define your behavioral expectations. All students know the rules in the regular classroom, but they are not quite sure what to expect in the new visual world. So gaya ng sinabi ko kanina sa introduction ko, this is the first time that we're implementing full online. If you're doing modular, this is the first time that you're doing modular, full modular. Not unless siguro kung galing ka talaga sa mga schools na talaga nagmo-modular learning na. So dahil doon, of course, nangangapa tayong lahat. So we have to help one another. We have to make everything clear, including, of course, what is expected of them, what is expected sa kanilang behavior and the like. And always, of course, use rewards and praises. Hindi porke online na, automatically that ends our job. Nope. Still, of course, lagi naman ganun, di ba? Sometimes it's the little things that truly matter the most. Okay? So itong mga rewards and phrases na to, itong reward systems na to, it really matter, of course, in the eyes of our students. Okay? At the end of the day, doing all these things, itong positive behavior na to, it would lead them, of course, to have the right discipline. Ay, kaya lang, pag sinabi kasi nating discipline, ano ba ang disiplina? Okay? So classroom discipline, of course, enforces the expectations set by classroom management principles. It requires teachers to use fairness, consistency, flexibility, logical consequences, assertiveness, motivation, firmness, modification. And of course, it has to be executed to a hierarchy of consequences or a sequential order of rules. So in other words, when we talk about classroom discipline, is really teaching our students to know what is right and what is wrong, even during the times, of course, that they're unguarded, na wala ang teacher. But we cannot do this one, of course, if we're trying to implement punishment. Remember, my dear teachers, discipline is never and will never be the same as punishment. Hindi po yan magiging magkaparehas. Okay? Discipline is about helping children to understand and moderate their own behavior. Okay? Discipline is about making them realize that what they did is a misdeed or that what they committed is something that should not be done. Okay? Punishment simply aims to control that behavior for that specific moment. But that does not mean that the students who are punished will learn. Okay? Kaya mahalaga po that we go after discipline and not really after punishment. So pag sinabi natin discipline, of course, there are some things that we must avoid. Eh, yung mga actions na ginagawa, gaya ng extra academic work, pag nagalit si teacher, magbibigay ng extra academic work. Reducing grades, for example, ay sabi ni Sir Joram, kapag ang mga bata hindi nagpapasa online ng on time, that is, ibig sabihin nun, hindi sila well-behaved. So, ang gagawin ko palagi, lagi kong babawasan lahat. Di ba? Of course, we have to understand na may mga times talaga, for example, kunyari nung bagyo, ako, personally, nag-extend ako ng deadlines ko. Why? Because I do understand, of course, the fact that not everyone can work during that specific period. Doesn't mean na hindi sila binagyo, hindi sila binaka, kaya nang gumawa ng bata. Meron tayong tinatawag na mental health na dapat maintindihan din natin, of course, at ma-address natin. So we're always proactive. So instead of reducing grades sa mga malilate, why not give additional grades sa mga maaga makapagpasa? Okay? So writing as punishment, iwasan yan. Physical labor, exercise, what of course, corporal punishment, harsh comments and humiliating reprimands, threats, shouting, nagging, forcing apologies, sarcastic remarks, group punishment, and then the like. Lahat po yan, my dear teachers, ay dapat po talaga nating iwasan. Because remember, ang atake po natin, positive, discipline, and everyday teaching. So also with respect to disciplinary practices during this pandemic, according to a study done by Transforming Schools Discipline Collaborative in the USA, so isa tong collaborative organization na nagtatrabaho sila, of course, para at least ma-ensure that all schools will remain safe and supported despite the pandemic or amid the pandemic. Sabi nila, number one, we have to eliminate or significantly reduce the use of exclusionary discipline during this time in recognition of the challenges students are facing. Okay? So, teachers, hindi natin pwede i-apply kung ano yung pagdidisiplina natin dati sa pagdidisiplina ngayon. Kaya nga halos lahat po ng schools, or if not all, nagkaroon ng panibagong student diary or student manual. Of course, the rules that we applied before cannot be applied exactly the same sa mga ganitong klaseng kabataan. Okay? And online learning offer clear, consistent expectations and use positive interventions to address challenging behavior. Always, that's the term. Positive po palagi. Gawin nating malinaw lahat sa kanila. And then pag naging malinaw na yan at hindi pa rin naggawa, we try to make them realize these things pero through a proactive approach. Positive intervention po palagi. Okay? Expand resources for mental health and emotional support. Napakahalaga po nito. Kaya po ako, for example, in my case, pag nakikita ko mga bata, medyo parang, for example, may estudyante na, kunyari, 2 linggong absent. Ako, hindi ko pepersahin yung bata na, ayan, 2 linggo ka ng absent. Anong balak mo sa buhay mo? Wala kang balak matuto. Hindi tayo magaganon, right? So what are we going to do is that we have to understand bakit kaya hindi pumapasok itong mga batang ito. So you can talk to the parents and then after that, pagbalik ang bata, mag-set kayo ng schedule with the guidance counselor because through this, the needs of the students, of course, would be addressed. Okay? Again, in an online learning setup, educators found it challenging to keep students engaged while attending to their own families, caregiving responsibilities, and personal needs. Added to that, of course, are the technical issues, lack of devices, internet service, sometimes, of course, yung absent communication with parents, with their guardians, with their work. Of course, these things cause us difficulties in ensuring that our students would be able to manifest good behavior, would be able, of course, to perform well in our lessons in their academics. That's why educators undoubtedly, we also struggled with fostering a sense of community in the virtual classroom. Dahil nga, of course, we're used to the old setup. But then again, sabi nung kaya ng sinasabi ko nga sa inyo kanina, of course, as teachers, we always have to find ways. And of course, we have to make the impossible possible. All right? So, furthermore, when we talk about, of course, online learning, there are also challenges that that our students are actually facing. Okay, so this is still from the Transforming School Discipline Collaborative, of course, in the USA. Okay, so number one, of course, physical health disparities. Ayan, wait lang po. Ayan, physical health disparities. Okay, syempre, of course, many students felt anxiety, fear, worry, and stress as they, of course, try to survive this kind of setup. Inequitable access to internet service and devices. 'Di ba? Kaya nga nauso talaga yung hashtag na bukod sa hashtag learn as one, di ba? Yung hashtag na tinatawag natin na ano, education is for all, no student left behind. Okay? Unfortunately, of course, may mga estudyante talaga na medyo sabihin natin hindi talaga ganun pinalad, kaya mas struggling talaga sa kanila. Expanded caregiving responsibilities. Dati, pag nasa school sila, ang thinking nila, mag-aaral, mag-exam sila. Ngayon, pwedeng habang nasa bahay sila, habang nag-exam sila, pwedeng pag-aalaga sila sa kapatid nilang bata, gumagawa sila ng gawaing bahay, and then the like. A lack of space to engage in online learning. 'Di ba? Kanina, for example, ako nasa loob na ako ng kwarto ko, pero rinig pa rin natin yung ingay, for example, ng mga dumadaan na bombero or whatsoever. Of course, this physical noise also, of course, contribute to of course make the online learning setup harder for us. Loss of family income, especially during the pandemic, marami talagang naapektuhan. Okay? Which force some students already to work. And definitely, of course, with the many problems that we are facing nowadays, there is an enhanced stress, trauma, and anxiety. Okay? The impact on mental health of the students, specifically right now, hindi pa ito nasusukan. But definitely, naging malaki na ang epekto, of course, itong pandemic at itong lahat ng pinagdadaanan natin. Okay? So, online learning challenges, according to Kivillion, in 2020, sabi naman niya, online teaching poses a different set of challenges also. Not only for students, but also for teachers, for us. Okay? Although, of course, collaboration and communication, maging mas madali siya in terms of being available 24/7 through the use of this technology, it does not mean na wala na tayong online learning challenges. Sabi dito, challenge number 1, passive students. Ako, problema ko to, minsan. Ang hirap minsan kasing persahin ng mga bata na, mag-on kayo ng camera. Why, of course, minsan nahihiya sila. Minsan, for example, hindi mo rin malaman, pag di ba naka-on, ibig sabihin ba noon, wala na sila sa tapat ng computer? O pag di ba naka-on, problema ba internet? Kumbaga parang hindi mo rin mapepersa talaga, of course, right? You have to also respect their privacy. Okay? So in online learning environments, it's important to help students engage with the course material in a way that makes sense for them. Especially when students are learning remotely, educators must recognize that students will only engage with course materials that they think are valuable. Kaya kung tayo teachers magle-lecture from the first minute up until the last minute of our class, then definitely our students would remain passive. But if we will try to teach them in the way they want to, then definitely the student engagement would be increased. Number 2, staying connected with students. Okay? It can be difficult for instructors to teach online when they struggle to gauge how students are comprehending. For example, the course content or whether they are participating in learning experiences. So, ang makakatulong sa atin dito, of course, is what we call feedback. Okay? Feedback loops are key to building stronger connections with learners, especially in an online environment. When students complete a task and when we give feedback, of course, the students would make the adjustments accordingly. Okay? So this, in this way, by giving feedback, by giving a classroom response, it can help us, of course, understand how the students are performing, and at the same time, the students will be able to understand what they need to improve. Challenge number 3, encouraging collaboration. So collaborative engagement motivates learning and promotes a learning and promotes a deeper and more critically aware approach to the subject matter. Unfortunately, collaboration is one of the most difficult things to do online. Ang hirap niyan, di ba? Dati nga sa face-to-face may tinatawag na freeloaders. Paano pa nga yung online, right? That is why, of course, to still encourage these things. Still, in form of feedback, in term of constant communication with them, will be able, of course, to know, ito yung dapat mong baguhin, ito yung constructive feedback galing sa klase mo, galing sa akin, and then the like. Through this way, of course, we're encouraging collaboration. So, natutulungan talaga nila ang isa't isa. Alright? So, now, this is the last part already of my presentation. Ayan. Actually, marami pa to, kaya lang we only have limited time today. So, siguro sa susunod na pagkakataon ko na share yung iba. Alright? So, but allow me right now to introduce to you the 10 classroom practices from students and educators to build community online. Okay? Online po. Number 1, sabi dito, create community agreements for the school year. Take note for the school year. And when you're doing community agreement, you have to understand that it is not all about you. It is not all about us teachers. It is about everyone in the class. Each students can contribute an idea, okay? and shared in a living and accessible document. Like for example, ilagay mo sa Google Docs, everyone can edit it. And then as a group, as a family, eventually address these challenges together. Okay, number two, create space for checking in, including at the start of the class. Ito po, teachers, napakahalaga. Alam kong limited yung time natin, pero hindi ibig sabihin nun, okay, lesson ako agad. Hindi. Okay, check-ins help determine the energy of the class and communicate with them. Okay, it's okay. To be not okay. Let's say, for example, lalo na kung talagang napansin yung hindi ganun ka-okay yung mga bata. And if needed, of course, follow up and provide additional support. If very complicated yung yung matter rather, you can also consult, of course, a guidance counselor. Third, of course, provide ongoing feedback. Napansin nyo kanina, let me just reiterate, feedback is important in a physical classroom setting, but it is also essential for online teaching to establish a personal connection with the students. Although admittedly, napakahirap po talaga mag-establish kahit ng rapport online. But then of course, if the students would feel that we are really concerned with regards to how they perform by giving immediate and consistent feedback, then definitely nothing is impossible. Fourth, provide a space for reclaiming power. Identify and offer resources, accommodations, or formal and informal tools of support that meet the ends of educators or students. And lastly, provide students for student leadership. When students share, for example, the mic, when the teachers rather share the mic with the students, in other words, we don't make everything depend on us. Kumbaga, we listen to them. It helps, of course, build relationships and trust. Okay? And through this, of course, we're able to address yung isang difficulty talaga ng relationship building na mahirap talaga i-achieve, of course, in an online setup. Okay? Six, of course, prioritize students' engagement over anything else. Okay? Interactive or collaborative class activities allow for a better balance of screen sharing, interaction, and community building. Kahit wala na tayong oras, you have to find ways. We can use breakout classrooms. We can use, for example, group activities. We can use group presentations and then the like, of course, to maximize student engagement. Okay? Always go for a collective decision making in a classroom. We and not me. Gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, online learning is not about us. It's not about the students, but it's about the entire educational community. Third, address conflict and harm with empathy and collective healing. Practicing empathy includes active listening. So we have to listen to them from time to time. Okay? It does not mean that we have to provide the advices. Lalo na kapag talagang komplikado ako, personally, pag talagang alam mong medyo very personal yung matter, do not give advice because we're not really experts pagdating sa ganyang bagay. We leave it, of course, to the guidance counselors. Okay, of course, Bien Ali, maging kakampi ka sa mga bata, hindi yung tipong ikaw yung dahilan kung bakit mas lalong umihirap at bakit mas lalong nilang hinihindihan ang edukasyon. And lastly, of course, address changing notions of safety in and outside the classroom. Always consider that the place that you're staying right now, if you feel comfortable there, it might not be the same with your students. So intindihin mo rin yung mga bagay na yon. You cannot, of course, expect them to have the best learning environment, especially that, of course, we're doing online classes. All right? So those are the things that you can do, of course, to be able to lessen yung isang bagay na talaga nakaka-stress sa ating lahat. And of course, that is misbehavior. In fact, most teachers will tell you that disciplining students is one of the toughest parts of their job. Okay? 53% of the teachers are stressed because of students' behavior. But in this online setup, alam nyo, ang pinakasagutan mo sa lahat ng sinabi ko kanina is really self-discipline. Okay? It's the ability to make yourself do things you know you should do even when you don't want to. Okay? Kahit anong tamad mo, gagawin mo kasi ito ang tama. The ability to control one's feelings and overcome one's weaknesses. A key indicator to improve learning outcomes and e-learning environment. If the students have this, the self-discipline, then definitely all those problems, all those disruptive behaviors, discipline issues, lahat yan will soon be gone. Because self-discipline is the key factor which influences learners and of course allows them to achieve our learning objectives, the main goals. Accordingly, self-discipline in daily routine and knowledge acquisition process is the key indicator to improve learning outcomes. Always remember, my dear teachers, okay? The students of the future will demand the learning support that is appropriate for their situations or context. Nothing more, nothing less. So it only means that if we're trying to choose to go back to the past, then it's not gonna work. Okay? Because everything changes. And if we are not going to go along with this, if we are not going to change along with these changes, then we can never change our students to the changed person that they should actually become. So that ends po our presentation today. So thank you po for watching. It's already 4:06. Pasensya na overtime tayo ng 7 minutes. Ayan. But I hope you learned a lot from our session this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sir Joram. Now we will proceed po with our question and answer portion. The first one is from Miss Alicia Fernandez. What are the challenges of online classroom management that you have encountered po and how did you handle it? Thank you po.
Ayan. How did I handle it? Anong problema? Actually, ako, for me, the main challenge siguro it's really a matter of asking your students to submit on time. Ako kasi, during face-to-face, my students would know that I hate late submissions. Talagang ayoko talaga ng late submissions. Okay? Baga, isa yan talaga sa mga bagay na talagang alam na alam ng mga bata pag na-late sila sa akin, nako talaga, baga, it's something na talagang dapat hindi nila i-commit. But in the online setup, of course, I have to be patient. Hindi ko pwedeng sabihin na, okay, 7 a.m., 7 a.m. lang. Dahil pag sinabi ng batang internet problem, pag sinabi ng bata, for example, nagkaroon ng ganitong issue and then the like, we have to be very considerate. Kumbaga, ang tawag nga natin, maximum tolerance. But how did I solve it? I solve it by giving extra incentives. Like number one, for example, I conduct like, parang tinatawag namin na, ang tawag namin parang parang PBB. Parang meron kaming mission of the week, 'di ba? Yung task for the week. Nakalagay nung for example, no late deadlines, no ganito, no late submissions, yung mga ganyan. Then yung kapag for example na-meet mo yun, may extra incentive ka or for example, yung mga hindi nakakamit nun, for example, with doing like they will be delivering for example a news report na para at least mas maging aware yung mga kaklase nila with regards to the many things happening. So yung mga simpleng bagay na yun, of course, you have to be very creative, of course, in encouraging your students to really, of course, show the behavior that you wish them, of course, to manifest. Ayun po, Miss Michelle.
Thank you very much, Sir Joram. For our next question po is from Miss Shane Halandan. What are the obstacles po that limit implementation of e-learning and what are the effective methods so we could reduce them po? Thank you.
Ako siguro, isang malaking obstacle na talagang pinipilit natin i-resolve would have to be cheating, di ba? Cheating cases online. Ako, I'm very fortunate na hindi ko naman siya naranasan. Siguro at least, siguro kumbaga, ako, so far, wala pa naman ako nahuhuli sa klase ko na nag-cheat. Pero based on the experiences of other teachers, talagang, lalo na mga nababasa ko online and the like, talagang, di ba, even DepEd, already acknowledged that specific culture na talagang prone siya for distance learning. Siguro yun talaga yung pinakamalaking obstacle na nakikita ko in this kind of setup. But then again, of course, how do we solve it? Number one, providing authentic assessments. Number two, of course, using other applications. Like for example, in UST, we have this application that we use to track plagiarism. Okay? So we also may mga ibang ginagamit pang application of course para ma-monitor din kung sino for example yung mga nagsa-search online during the time of course that you're conducting exams. So of course, pero if you don't have this kind of resources, for example, applications, then I really think it would boil down dun sa how what kind of assessment do you really provide your students? Because if we were going to be critical about it, then I think naman there's always a way of course to avoid this distance cheating, that's like what DepEd calls it, na talagang hindi talaga siya mangyari. Ayun lang po, Miss Michelle.
Thank you very much, Sir Joram. That's all the question that we have for now. Any last reminders for our viewers po?
Last reminder, siguro ako, since we're talking about discipline, definitely we have to understand that the discipline problems na meron ng mga estudyante before ay ibang-iba sa mga discipline problems na meron ng mga estudyante ngayon. So this is a matter of knowing the other side. Okay, so let us not stop and let us not, of course, kumbaga let this challenges, hindrances, kumbaga parang not reach us, not let us, of course, reach our ultimate goal, which is to help our students become a better version of themselves. Let us continue to inspire others. Let us continue, of course, to work together para achieve natin kung ano talaga yung purpose natin dito. And really, of course, that is to help our students not only learn this academic stuff, but also, of course, develop a character inculcated with positive morals and virtues.
There we have it. In behalf of Ibao Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this inspiring and insightful learning session. It is truly to honor to have you with us today, Sir Joram. And to all our valuable viewers, all thanks to you for continuous patronage on our daily learning session. We encourage you to subscribe and watch on our official Tibal Facebook and YouTube channel. For those who are looking for the registration link, kindly go on in our Facebook page so you can still register for this webinar. Muli maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.